Hello, thank you for joining us today for our session on mixed methods. My name is Megan Morris, and I will be going through our recorded presentation today. And then afterwards, Jodi Holtrop will join me for our interactive session. So just very quickly, what we'll be talking about today is a really quick overview of qualitative and quantitative research methods. Going over a definition of mixed methods versus multi-methods, when to use mixed methods, and then I'll quickly go through 3 of the main mixed method study designs. And then finally, we'll talk shortly on the considerations in how to decide when to use mixed methods. Very quickly, I'm sure many of you are very aware of quantitative research designs. So quantitative research involves numbers. You're often counting things, and you hope to explain outcomes. And you often are recruiting a sample that represents the targeted population. Oftentimes, you might be testing theories or outcomes and looking at relationships between variables. In pragmatic trials, often our data collection methods include extracting data from electronic medical records, surveying patients or providers or other key stakeholders, and then collecting quantitative descriptions or measures about with our study populations. Oftentimes we're using statistics to analyze our data, and if we're not using formal statistics, there is some math involved. In contrast, qualitative research involves words. You are attempting to explain and provide meaning about a particular phenomenon or the context in which a phenomenon occurs. It is not necessarily representative of an entire population. Qualitative data collection often involves talking to people, so engaging people in interviews or focus groups. You might be watching people through observations. Sometimes we're recording what people do. And then finally, if you have a document with lots and lots of text, you can do a text analysis, qualitative analysis on that text, right? And for the analysis of qualitative, we're looking to sort and create themes and that represent the meaning behind, again, particular phenomenon or the context. And we may use theory to help inform the analysis. All right, mixed versus multi-methods. So multi-methods is when you use one or more methods. It can be two qualitative, two quantitative, or it could be a qualitative and a quantitative method. It is important to note multi-methods is when you are doing the methods in parallel to each other. You are not necessarily integrating them. Mixed methods, in contrast, is you're using both qualitative and quantitative methods, but you're absolutely being very deliberate with mixing and integrating the data so that one informs the others. The mixing and integration can happen at 2 stages, either the data collection and or the data analysis stage. So again, it's really important that mixed methods, you're integrating both of them. If you have a very savvy reviewer, they will ding you if you are proposing mixed methods, study design, and you are not doing this integration, describing this integration process. When might you use mixed methods, particularly in the context of pragmatic trials? So you might want to understand multiple perspectives to really enhance the meaning of the results. One of our colleagues says that mixed methods is 1 + 1 = 3. So this really enhanced meaning. Sometimes you need contextual information to really understand how the problem that you're the context in which a problem occurs or the setting. Sometimes you'll use the qualitative and quantitative to help compare, validate, or triangulate your results. And then finally, you might think about doing examining processes or experiences with the outcomes of your study. So this is a table that really describes different types of again, that integration. And this is a table of types of integration during our data collection phase. I'm not going to go over these right now, but I just want to expose you to them because we'll be spending more time during our interactive part of our session going over these and applying these different integration types. So we have integration types for data collection, but also our data analysis process. So again, these are the different table of different types for integrating during the analysis phase. All right, on to our main mixed method study designs. So I'll be going over 3 today, but there are other mixed method study designs, but that's beyond the scope of what we have time for today. So first we have our exploratory sequential study design. So exploratory is when you start with our qualitative phase. So you do qualitative data collection and analysis. And then you use the results from that to really inform the next phase, which is quantitative data collection and analysis. And then at the end, you work on integrating both, again, the qualitative and the quantitative. So the quantitative phase that you might, again, the qualitative might inform is thinking about developing or modifying a quantitative instrument, thinking about modifying an intervention that will be implemented, or even implementation strategies. So you might use exploratory sequential for a pragmatic trial when you want to, again, think about developing or adapting an intervention or even an instrument based on the population that you'll be engaging in your study and then also the context. Exploratory sequential is really informative. Again, if you in the qualitative phase engage your stakeholders or your participants you'll be engaging in your quantitative to really understand their experiences and their preferences and their context, and really understand if there might be some barriers or challenges you might experience with implementing your intervention. It allows you time to potentially make some modification to both your intervention, but also your implementation strategy if needed. And then finally, it's really important in pragmatic trials to be engaging stakeholders, and exploratory sequential is an excellent way to really engage your stakeholders at the very beginning of your project, your study. There's some benefits, but also drawbacks of this study design. So again, it's helpful to understand potential adoption or even maintenance issues before or even early in your implementing your intervention so that you can potentially make modifications if needed. Again, this is a critical step if you're going to be developing an instrument or survey, and is really important for engaging our stakeholders. Some challenges though with this study design. It can take more time because you have to build in that first qualitative phase to really learn and understand before you're implementing your intervention. And because the first phase is qualitative and more exploratory, you have to be prepared if perhaps your participants say, you know what, that's not really the intervention that would be most meaningful or really applicable in our setting. Or maybe your intervention needs significant modifications prior to implementing. So that is always a risk when you do the qualitative first. So this is a joint display for an exploratory sequential study design. So really quickly, a joint display, like we're looking at here, is a way to share information with your audience about both your qualitative and your quantitative findings. So you can see on the left-hand side of this table on the very left-hand side are our themes that the authors identified in their qualitative findings. And then as you go towards the right, they really explain what those findings were, and then that really informed on the very right are the instruments and the surveys they decided to use in their study. So again, you can see how the qualitative really informed what's on the right, the quantitative. So next, the study design is explanatory sequential. And explanatory is when you actually start with your quantitative data collection and analysis. And then those results really inform that second phase, which is our qualitative data collection and analysis. And then finally, you integrate the results at the end. So it's easy to potentially get explanatory and exploratory confused. And the trick that I use is always, how is the qualitative being used? So the qualitative in an explanatory model is really, the qualitative is helping it explain the findings from the quantitative phase. And then in the previous design, the exploratory, the qualitative was first exploring the context, the phenomena, the participants, to really inform that second phase, quantitative phase. All right, so when might you use explanatory in a pragmatic trial? We often do this when we have the results of our quantitative findings from our study, and we really want to understand the why and the how and the who of our results. So some examples of that is, if we are wanting to understand, some participants were more successful than others. So why might that have occurred? So you might do some qualitative interviews with the successful and the less successful participants, or even clinics, to really understand what was going on that potentially led to their particular results of your trial. You could also just, why did that intervention be successful or even unsuccessful? So if you have a null finding in your trial, you might want to talk to all your participants to understand what might lead to that outcome. And then, like I said, there might be a certain cohort that responded the way they did. Perhaps men had a different response than the women, and you might want to understand that, sex-based difference. So some benefits and potential drawbacks of an explanatory sequential model is, some benefits is that it's data-driven and emergent. It really minimizes participant burden because you're not necessarily collecting the quantitative and qualitative at the same time. So you're not doing a ton of data collection with the same people at once. And it's also really useful in terms of maintenance, to understand, okay, our intervention is complete. Is this, while our trial is complete, is the intervention going to continue to be used by our study participants? Some drawbacks is timing can be an issue, because you, again, have to build in that second phase. Oftentimes interventions can be drawn out, things can delay it, and that you might not end up as much time or any time to really do that qualitative piece. Related to that, it can be time consuming, because again, you have to go back to your study participants and talk with them. And it does require your quantitative results to be at least partially completed. So again, so it informs that second phase, qualitative phase. There's always the potential that your participants might have recall bias, or you might have loss of participants, because if your intervention was a year or even 2 years long, a participant who participated 18 months ago might not remember all the details. And then finally, you have to think about the potential that your qualitative findings might actually contradict your quantitative findings. And so you need to think about how you might handle that piece. This is a joint display for explanatory studies. So it's really tiny here, but trust me, on the left hand, we have our findings for our quantitative. So in this case, it was low scoring and high scoring clinics. And so again, they went in and did qualitative interviews and focus groups with the clinics, and quotations from those clinics is displayed on our right-hand side. Our final study design that we'll be discussing is concurrent or convergent parallel. And this is when you are simply collecting your qualitative and your quantitative data at the same time, and you're analyzing at the same time. But then you are really merging the two data sets and then interpreting the merged results together. So when might you use this in a pragmatic trial? So this is really a key study design if you're wanting to understand how the intervention is working in the moment, all right? So again, if you have a 2-year trial, you might want to collect some qualitative data at certain time points to really understand, how is this working at the beginning when we have initially introduced this intervention to our participants. Related to that is helpful to understand participants' experiences over time. So again, maybe at the beginning of the intervention, they're really kind of struggling with implementing and really getting the hang. They, really hit their stride midpoint, but then at the end of the trial, they might be starting to forget about the intervention. So again, understanding that intervention across time could be important. Or if there's changes or adaptations to your intervention over time. And then finally, it's useful if you do not want the results of either the quantitative or qualitative to be influencing each other. So benefits is the timing is easier because you are collecting and analyzing your data simultaneously. And again, it's really helpful in understanding what's happening in the moment in vivo. And it does minimize recall bias because you're, instead of asking someone about what happened a year ago, you're asking what happened maybe last week or last month or even that day. Some potential drawbacks is that it can be burdensome for our study participants because you are asking them to participate in both quantitative and qualitative data collection. The data sometimes does not really converge seamlessly and it can be contradictory. And so you, again, need to think through how you are going to handle that. And then finally, one could potentially influence the results of the other. This is a joint display for a concurrent or convergent parallel design. So on your very left, you have 4 groups that the authors separated their study participants in, sort of high, low, low, high, 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 and low, low. And so you have your quantitative results that were collected again simultaneously as your qualitative, and you have your qualitative results on the right. Again, those are the patient's experiences. So there are others, mixed method study designs. They are more complex and really build upon the 3 that we just discussed today. So so just know that our study designs can be mixed or combined, but again, we're not going to go over that today. All right. Next, and finally, just thinking about our study design. You need to think about your research question, how much time you have, what resources you have, what types of resources you have and expertise on your team. You really need someone who is skilled at both quantitative and qualitative, but also at the mixing. So you have to demonstrate who has experience with the mixing stage, okay? And you need to think about where you're at in your study topic, and also just where the literature is with your particular topic. All right, so that concludes our recorded sessions. I've included my and Jodi's contact information and a few additional references. We look forward to interacting with you in this next phase of our session together. Thank you.